So we got Connor O'Gara here again. Saturday down south. We're talking about Texas A&M. It's great being able to talk, Connor. Let's get right into it. Texas A&M offensively. Miami and Texas A&M are going to play that second week of the season on September 9th. This one's in Miami, but offensively with the Aggies, it's going to be a new look from what Miami saw a year ago, with just new quarterback and new offensive coordinator. Can you speak on that and maybe kind of what you're expecting to see here?
Allegedly, it's going to be a new look. That's what we're assuming with Bobby Petrino until we actually see Bobby Petrino calling plays and everybody is on board with him as the full-time play caller. It's kind of like, well, who knows when Jimbo Fisher is going to step in and leave his stamp on this offense. Yes, it has to be different because A&M was setting offensive football back decades with what it was doing. And it's all about the presentation. Jordan Rodgers has talked a lot about this subject. And I think with A&M, the biggest thing that you want to see is them utilizing these weapons that they have. And Connor Wigman showed a lot of promise down the stretch last year, obviously post Miami game, and these weapons that they have at receiver with Anaya Smith coming back, Evan Stewart is a stud, Moose Muhammad. I mean, they have pieces in place, especially with that offensive line. If they can have the continuity up there that one would think they're going to, they should be explosive and they should be able to do these things that they've really been lacking. And if Jimbo Fisher isn't calling plays anymore, maybe we're going to get a little bit more of some of the pre-snap misdirection, more tempo. I think this A&M has a ton of room for improvement. And I think by week 2, we should be seeing that.
Connor, we talked about with Coach Fisher a year, when we've talked about these before, and I know there were, what would the offense even look like before? And again, last year, just a reminder, 12th in the SEC in total offense, 13th in scoring. So obviously the quarterback situation, whatever it might be, it wasn't working. It wasn't going well. 5-7, Miami went 5-7. So certainly both these teams want to get going. Connor, with Petrino, and you touched on it a little bit there. So he comes in. What are you expecting essentially? Because I know you're a little hesitant. What exactly are we going to see from A&M this season? But what's kind of an ideal situation? What could it possibly be with Petrino there, or his offense, or Jimbo's, or whatever you might think how it's going to look?
More tempo, got to go up tempo. If you look at the games that A&M was actually willing to do that, LSU game being one of them, they got into such a better offensive rhythm when they were able to do that. Kind of simplifies things a little bit for a young quarterback like Connor Wigman, and more like the offense he played in high school. More pre-snap motion, would expect more of that, would expect more 4 wide sets, a little bit more of the traditional Bobby Petrino mold. I know that Jimbo Fisher pushed back on some of that talk at SEC Media Day, saying like, oh, he's underneath routes and stuff like that as well. Like, he's not just 4 wide guy. Like, nobody's saying that, but I expect Bobby Petrino to have his stamp on this offense. I truly do. And while Jimbo Fisher is probably going to still try and play this thing close to the vest and be super coy about who's calling which play where, I think you should see more of these modern concepts. You just have to be able to, because it's not so much what's happening after the snap. It's a lot of the pre-snap stuff to just get a defense on its heels and get them into some of these weird matchups, being able to recognize man coverage or zone coverage pre-snap. And what does that do for a young quarterback? What a man in motion, like that's literally his entire function. And he's not going to be targeted on a play, but he's going to tell you what a quarterback should be looking for in that spot. I think we see more of those instances, and it should make for a more explosive downfield attack, even if they don't necessarily have the rushing attack with Devon Achane like we saw a year ago. Now he's in Miami, in your neck of the woods, somebody that should have a really good NFL future. I still think that we should see a lot more balance, and balance that works, and balance that it allows A&M to be able to stretch the field vertically.
That LSU game, look, when you're having a disappointing season, it almost feels like there's not ever a lot of positives to take from it. But do you think with what Wigman was able to do, what the team was able to do to kind of get that LSU win, essentially maybe some sort of a positive going into the offseason, what do you think that can do maybe for the team, for Connor, as he looks to, obviously build on with what he was able to do a year ago?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I looked at that game and I was like, Connor Wigman might spell his first name wrong, in my opinion. I think it should be 2 N's and an O in Connor. That's just
obviously
me.
Yeah.
Very biased, but you look at some of the throws that he can make, and you're like, man, I get why he is the most talented quarterback that Jimbo Fisher has had to work with since Jameis Winston. I mean, that was the billing. And if you heard Jimbo talk about him during the recruiting process, you're like, Jimbo is in love. And this guy is going to be playing really, really soon. Kind of weird that he hasn't named him the starter. Probably just wants to make sure Max Johnson isn't doing some post post like mid fall camp transfer portal decision. I don't know, but Connor Wigman's going to be the guy. And I do think that he has the best tools to be able to execute this offense. He can make all the throws. He has the mobility. He's not mobile like Haynes King was necessarily, but I do think that he has a lot of those skills that you just need to be able to execute an offense in today's day and age. And Bobby Petrino hasn't always defaulted to that. I know from a modern standpoint, we think of like Lamar as the guy who's associated, but like, don't forget Ryan Mallett, who ran like a 5.4 40, also had a ton of success with Bobby Petrino back in the day at Arkansas. So I expect that to be part of the game. But I'm a Connor Wigman believer. If you told me that he was going to be an all SEC guy by season's end, it would not surprise me at all. It's just going to be about scheme and about having the right surroundings for him.
Yeah, nearly 900 yards, 8 touchdowns with no picks last year. I think outside looking in, from my perspective, I just having a quarterback from A&M standpoint, kind of when we've done these before, it's like, well, which guy are they going to go with? They had different options, and I know each person probably likes certain different guys. But yeah, with Wigman, it just seems like, as you mentioned, it looks like he could definitely take off from what he did a year ago. The receivers, as you mentioned, they're back. They're top 3 guys. And we've seen it. We saw it at Miami, in that game. Got a chance to see what Evan was able to do, Anias and things like that. But what are you kind of seeing from those guys, the group of receivers, to essentially help, Petrino's offense, the offense in general, get ignited with Wigman there? But those 3 in particular, receiver.
I never really advocate for a guy after his freshman season getting preseason all conference love. I thought Evan Stewart not getting one of those 7 receiver spots on the preseason all SEC teams was a slap in the face. I thought he was brilliant as a true freshman in what we saw in him in limited stretches. And if you don't believe that, go back and watch the plays he was making against Alabama. There was a reason why Jimbo Fisher drew up that wildly ineffective goal line fade with the game on the line, just thinking, just get the ball in Evan Stewart's hands. Let's see if he can make a play. Yeah, what he was able to do lining up on the outside 88% of his snaps as a true freshman in this conference, that's really, really rare. And I pointed to the fact that under Jimbo Fisher, true freshman receivers do not pop off. Anias Smith had the most receiving yards of a wide receiver under Jimbo Fisher at A&M. It was like 291. And Evan Stewart more than doubled that. He's a stud. He could lead the SEC in receiving if he stays healthy, if this offense is going to really be able to attack downfield. If there's a guy in the entire conference that's going to benefit from a scheme change, it's Evan Stewart. He is that type of playmaker. And Anias Smith is a nice player. Didn't stay healthy last year. He's a guy that they need. They need him to be able to execute in the slot, what he brings from a leadership standpoint in that receiver room. They had too many young receivers who were making a lot of freshman mistakes last year on and off the field. I thought that was the case. And they really missed Anias Smith, but they should be really explosive in those spots. It's just all about scheme. And Moose Muhammad, somebody who's been in and out of the Jimbo Fisher doghouse as well. I'm high on this group. This is kind of the reason why this scheme could work and why Bobby Petrino could be kind of the gasoline on the fire.
So Texas A&M, they're going to start practices on August 2nd as they begin their preseason. Again, Miami's going to play in week 2. They got New Mexico. Miami has Miami of Ohio in their week 1 matchup. And maybe we're going to lead into that. Maybe it's going to be running back, pick any position, but just, is there a key position battle in fall camp that you're looking forward to watching that's essentially you're going to be paying close attention to?
Yeah, I think on the defensive line, they've got to get things figured out. They were just atrocious against the run last year. And I think that was the reason why, and I probably said to you coming into last season, I thought A&M was the most overrated team in college football. I thought people wildly overlooked what they lost in the front 7, and everybody was pointing to the 5 stars, and they're saying, oh, Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, like these guys are going to fill in these spots, and you're going to see what they're capable of. I'm like, true freshmen don't step in and really do that in the trenches in this conference. And sure enough, they had issues all over the place in the defensive line. So seeing those guys, seeing Diggs and McKinley Jackson is somebody that I'm really high on. But again, like another guy who couldn't stay healthy last year, they had so many depth issues on the defensive line. Like, how does that rotation kind of work itself out? And then from a scheme standpoint, does it even matter? Cole Kubelik brought that up to me at SEC Media Days last week. He's like, I went back and watched a lot of their games, and they can have all the talent in the world, but some of the things that they were being asked to do from a defensive line standpoint, just it was not working at all. So I kind of wonder, wonder, like, even if some of those guys are capable of popping and we're talking about them a lot post fall camp, does it matter for that team? And can they actually improve if they don't have a significant change from a scheme standpoint? But yeah, seeing if those guys, those 5 stars, can really establish themselves as true every down, 3 down players type starters on that defensive line, that's going to be huge for A&M this year.
It's interesting as you're talking about coaches. It kind of reminds me of conversation you had with Mike Elko. I remember that we talked about him before, and obviously the success he had there at Duke in his first year. It was just kind of interesting how that works out. Yeah, Texas A&M last in the SEC in rushing defense a year ago. Connor, defensive breakout player. You touched on some defensive linemen. Is there a defensive player that you think will break out for them, or maybe kind of be one of those guys that kind of really elevates himself? Is there a guy that you could single out?
Yeah, I mean, Stewart and Nolan are the ones that everybody's, expecting. And Stewart last year, I know a guy that you know very well from your neck of the woods. Don't look at the PFF run grade numbers for him. Not particularly inspiring. I don't know. Like, I think he was graded at like a 37 or something like that, which that's out of 100. That's not particularly good. But again, he's a true freshman playing the majority of his reps against SEC competition. It's not an easy thing to be able to do, especially for an edge guy. You're still figuring out some of that technique and what that looks like. But I mean, Walter Nolan's the guy that if he takes off and takes that next step and he's a game wrecker on the inside, and he and McKinley Jackson are forming this tremendous duo, that just changes what you're capable of. Everybody last year points to how much Georgia lost. And I agree, Georgia lost a ton from that defense, obviously 8 starters. But when you return a game wrecker like Jalen Carter and you see the things that he can do on the interior, like, man, this covers up so many weaknesses when you have a guy that can get home the way that he does and the way that he is able to take on double teams. So can Walter Nolan be like the second coming of Jalen Carter? Mason Smith from LSU probably has the best chance of anyone in the SEC to do that. But that's the guy that, look, if you're going to be one of these top 2 recruits nationally, depending on what service you're looking at. I realize the audience that I'm talking to here, but if you're going to be ranked that high, you got to kind of take that next step in year 2. I think A&M fans are really hopeful that Walter Nolan can be that dude.
It's interesting to hearing you bring that up. Yeah, Mason Smith, I remember seeing him at a Miami camp just in high school. It's crazy just seeing his talent, his ability there. From Miami, Leonard Taylor, a defensive tackle that was number 4 ranked prospect overall in the country coming out in 2021. So the defensive tackle, he's looking to take a jump in year 3 from his standpoint. And it's certainly key. And I know Miami wishes they had a little bit more up front at the defensive tackle position. And we'll see if anything kind of transpires. I think Miami could be maybe mixing up, maybe putting some different looks there just to try to cover up what they lost with Darrell Jackson going to Florida State. Connor, this game, and it didn't go last season. So I didn't even mention, but Texas A&M wins that 17-9. Miami doesn't get a touchdown. Both teams go 5-7. Just not a good season. But maybe for this year, week 2, the importance for both of these teams is that Jimbo's been there longer, but certainly these teams need to win more than 5 games to have a successful season. What do you see as the importance for this game, for this teams? They're just in week 2, again, non-conference game though.
College football is so unique in that we get this 8-month off season, and it's unique in that so many of these games that are played week 1, week 2, maybe non-conference play, something like that, they can wipe 8 months away just like that. Or alternatively, they can take that optimism and have it soaring to new heights. And Florida last year, that season opening game against Utah, where Billy Napier is like tempering expectations going in. He's like, we need patience. Support staff, we're building things out. And then they beat Utah week 1. It's like, oh, it's on. Like, we're ready to compete in the East. We're gonna take Georgia down. Like, and then of course you see the way that things played out. But this offseason, the entire conversation with Miami and A&M is, man, like, gosh, it can't get much worse than that, right? Like, they're destined for improvement. You win that game week 2, whoever that team is, and there's a little bit of that confirmation bias. We expect those 2 teams to be 2 of the most improved in all of college football. I mean, A&M leads the SEC in percentage of returning production, the great stat that Bill Connolly puts together every offseason. And you look at the pieces that are in place there and you say, improvement should be coming. And if you're losing a game, if you're A&M that you won last year, one of the 5 that you won, then all of a sudden you have people questioning. And then, I'm not a believer that Jimbo Fisher's on the hot seat, and I've got 76.8 million reasons why he's not on the hot seat. But there are certain things that you just look at in terms of program momentum. And at what point does that hurt you and what you're trying to do on the recruiting trail? Both those teams are trying to recruit top 5 classes year after year. That's what it's going to take for them to get back to get to those levels. So that game's significant, even though it's a game of 5 and 7 teams. I do think that is significant for controlling how we're talking about those 2 programs who feel like they're destined for improvement. But man, if they lose, whoever loses that game is going to have to deal with the same old narrative.
It's certainly, from a Miami perspective, just kind of hearing you talk, it feels very similar. It's going to feel very deflating from a Miami fan base, from a Miami standpoint. I think the players really need to get into a positive role. They've not had a lot of success in recent years. And if they were to drop that one, not a here we go again, but it's what you're saying of just kind of, are they better? Is it the 8 months stuff that you're talking about? Is there improvement from a year ago from both standpoints? And certainly playing well in that one. As you were talking, I was kind of looking up because I remember TCU last year. The big storyline in college football, going from 5 wins to the national title game. It was week 4. It felt like a pivotal point, kind of looking back at their season. They beat Oklahoma, and that was a big game for them. And essentially, regardless of what anyone thought of TCU at the time, they got that positive momentum, and that's what you're speaking about. And again, you only get 12 of them in the regular season. You've got to build that positive momentum. I think you're right. I think it's going to be a huge game for both teams. Regardless, neither team will probably be ranked. Or certainly, it's not like it was last year. But I think it's going to be huge. That's why I'm glad we're talking. I'm going to let you get going. Great insight here, but I definitely appreciate you taking the time here.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. Look, if we want to dig into Jimbo Fisher buyout numbers on a separate instance, we want to really break that down. You just let me know. I'm the person to be able to break all those numbers down.
I know it's in your back pocket and you got it ready to go. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Anytime, man.